Welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's a pleasure to be back on this beautiful Monday morning, the 26th of January 2026. In Uganda, today is a Monday, 13 minutes past 9 a.m. It's a Liberation Day, the day that the ruling government or the National Resistance Army does celebrate or mark the day that they captured a power. Now, I do not know, we do honor it as a public holiday. I do not know of how many people actually celebrate it for the instance that it was for or is for, other than those that fought in the war itself. But given recent events, I wouldn't be too surprised if a lot of people do not feel the same way. Anyways, it's a pleasure to be back. This beautiful morning, we'll be discussing the events from the weekend. Last night, our focus was on that a shambolic performance from Arsenal against Manchester United that we did witness on Super Sunday. Really, so that's where our lenses were, and we discussed that game at full breadth. We looked at the key moments of the game. We looked at how or where Arsenal got it wrong. We looked at how and where Manchester United got it right. Perhaps we'll continue to digest that conversation as well as we go on through this week. But because we have UEFA Champions League football on Wednesday, perhaps not for the entirety of the week for us on this forum. Nonetheless, this morning, our focus will go on another event from Super Sunday in that Chelsea game, because I thought we made 2 steps forward and 3 steps backwards in the officiation of the game. The inconsistency of Premier League officials did continue, but you will find that this time round, the VAR official who was in the game for Manchester City as a referee, Halam Farai made a very wonderful decision that many thought was controversial, or some thought was controversial. He himself put the game in controversy for a poor decision in that game against Crystal Palace. So we'll be looking at that and what the implications of that are. And I don't know, I've always questioned this, and I will continue to question it for as long as the situation persists, for as long as they do not show us that they will try to do otherwise or improve. It does feel to me, at least to a certain, as ugly as that sounds to say, unfortunately, I'm compelled to believe the case. In terms of reality, the case is that, or the expectation is that on a weekly basis, they get to review their own actions, interpret them for what they were, and review where they got it wrong, and perhaps try to do better next time. But on a day-to-day basis, or on a weekly basis, it does not feel that way. I'll give you an example. This is a real-life example. A lot of times, because when I record my content, I watch it myself first, because I'm my own editor and I edit. Sometimes it comes at my own cost in the sake of cutting out certain moments or fact or sections that were critical to a debate, but because I may have represented a fact or gotten a statistic wrong, to avoid that, or to avoid misleading my viewers and my audience, I try to correct that. And even if something slides under the radar, or as you know, in hindsight, sorry, not hindsight, but as an error, as a lapse in concentration, the moment I see it, I come back in the next broadcast, in the next video, and I self-correct. On a given number of occasions on this forum, I've self-corrected. I've been corrected by my followers, people that engage in our, daily conversation, in our daily debates, and I thank them for that. People like Pedri who, do a bit of research here and there, who follow the game as much as I almost do, or perhaps even more. I do not know. But you, the fans, the followers of the forum, do correct me on every other day. You point out the facts. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree, because when it comes to statistical facts, sometimes, given the plethora that they are in the game of football, that come on almost a daily basis, we sometimes get facts mixed up. For example, you represent a fact from a different game to have happened in another game. As unfortunate as that may be, it does happen. Now, the beauty of it is that when you self-correct, you acknowledge error. Now, for the Premier League referees, it does not feel like that they are self-correcting on a weekly basis, because what is a foul on one weekend is not a foul on the following weekend, and then the weekend after that, it will again be a foul. So the inconsistencies in between are what bring the game in disrepute, are what cause these decisions to be contentious. So over the weekend, we had one such a decision. Like I said, for those of you that care to remember, on Saturday night, we came on here and spoke about referee Farai Halam for his correct decision not to award the penalty against Manchester City in their 2-0 victory against Wolves. Why? Really, the players' hands were spread up apart when Omar Mamouche tried to flip the ball back. The ball brushes the thigh of the player before hitting the arm. But also, there was no clear and obvious intention for the player to handle the ball. It hit his arm again. Now, he decides that's not a penalty. He's summoned to the monitor, the pitch side monitor, by the VAR led by who? Darren England. Darren England was the VAR official, or the lead VAR official, in Manchester City's game against Wolverhampton Wanderers, in which referee Farai Halam did not award that penalty. He made the correct decision. We spoke about that. Yes, I did acknowledge that it is subjective in a way, because another person could justify it, or at least try to. But even though they did, it doesn't conclusively say it is the correct decision. If it had been given, I stood with the referee to say his decision was right to award the penalty. Now, fast forward, just a day later, Darren England is the center referee in the game between Chelsea and Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park. Now, a Crystal Palace player appears to have handled the ball in the area, and he awards a penalty. I'm trying to remember who the Crystal Palace player was who actually handled that ball in the area, and this is after dismissing the incident for not a penalty. He then gets someone to the monitor, that's to the pitch side, yes, I think it was Jade Covett, Jade Camvot, not Covett, Jade Camvot, who handled the ball in the area. So he gets someone to the monitor, he reviews the incident. Now, the ball is played, I think it was by Joao Pedro. Yes. The ball brushes off the chest of Jade Camvot and then hits his arm. Now, contrary, or in a sharp disparity between the incident that we saw in the Manchester City Wolves game, Jade's arm was 10 times closer to his body than that of a Mosquera in the Wolves game. So, in other words, ball brushes off his chest, hits his arm, which is by his body in a natural position. The referee goes to the monitor, reviews the incident, takes a bit of time, and he judges that the player handles the ball, or the ball hits his arm accidentally, that there is no intention by the player to handle the ball. But guess what his final verdict was? His final verdict was it should be a penalty nonetheless. Now, again, what was the justification for that, or the school of opinion that the VAR officials are floated around? The school of thought, or the opinion that they floated around, was that the ball was destined for the back of the net, and therefore a goal scoring opportunity had been denied, or he blocked the ball from going into the back of the net. Now, here's the controversy, is that the referee acknowledges it was accidental, no intention for the player to handle the ball. But then you penalize him for the accident. Make it make sense to me, make it make sense. Hi, Joanne. Good morning. Good to have you on the broadcast. Allow me put this poll up for you guys. Should Chelsea have been awarded a penalty? That is our poll question today. Should Chelsea have been awarded a penalty against Crystal Palace? That is our poll today. So it's a yes or no from you. That's what I expect. So, guys, check out the poll. Should Chelsea have been awarded a penalty against Crystal Palace? Yes or no? Please vote on that. Joanne says much love from Argentina. Love to you all. Much love from Kampala, Uganda, because that's where we are streaming live from. So, I do not understand. I do not understand how you make that judgment, how you acknowledge an accident and then penalize the accident. Imagine your child comes to you and they say, I made a mistake and this is what happened. And you acknowledge it is an honest mistake, but you still punish them for it. So the referee awards a penalty and gives out a yellow card. Now, in that ruling, he also goes on to say that it's not a red card, because if he had intentionally, for example, if he had intentionally handled the ball, preventing it from going into the back of the net, then it should be a red card, because he would have stopped a clear goal from going in. That's the school of thought, or that's what the rules say, And so for me, the challenge for this is that how do you acknowledge error on one part and penalize it on the other to favor an opponent? Because that's what it felt. You've reviewed the incident. First of all, in your own on-field decision, you've not given the penalty. And this is not to judge that he had not seen the handball in the first place, Unfortunately, Joanne, you're typing, I don't know, in what? In Argentine, in Mexican, I do not know the language. I'm more comfortable with English. So whatever the language it is that you're typing in, thanks for one, the engagement and the feedback. Unfortunately, I cannot juggle between translators and then, reading comments and then presenting my case. But I do appreciate you for taking the time. I hope your comments are valid. I hope your comments in the right spirit, that they are not derogatory to anybody on this forum, or do not put the broadcast in disrepute. But thank you so much. So I do not get it when you acknowledge that, a player has made an honest mistake. The ball, first of all, brushes off his chest, which would pass for a ball to hand. Like I've argued before, it's not necessarily a rule. It's sort of a backhead kind of principle that referees or match officials carry with them in their officiation of the game. And yet Darren England seems to have left his common sense back home. And remember, in that game against Manchester City, when he's the fourth official, according to the commentators, they were being insistent. And he was leading that conversation with Farai Hallam. And Farai Hallam decided to stick with his own field decision. Now, like I said, in the aftermath of that very decision, it felt that in officiation of the game in England had broken a barrier, a long unwritten rule of the moment you get sent to the monitor, you ought to change your decision. So he looked like he had reversed that to say, no, not every time you get to send to the pitchside monitor to review an incident, you ought to change your decision. He had given us that, something that we had literally not seen in forever or in a very long while. So he gives us that. Fast forward, the match official, Darren England, who was, like I said, head of VR in that game, goes in the subsequent game that he's in charge of as a referee and literally says, yeah, I know Farai did that, but it's time to reset back to default settings. It's time to press that reset button and we'll get back to default settings. Why? Because the moment you get sent to the monitor and you're spoken to by the VR official, you ought to change your own field decision. That's what it felt like. He justified it the way he justified it. Was it the correct? Was it right? No. Just because you can justify something, it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it gospel truth. You say esteo por domi yemi. Jesus Christ. I would have tried beyond that, but let me not bite my tongue. Anyways, so for me, it felt ugly. It felt such a poor decision. Like I said, ball brushes off the player's chest before hitting his arm. Arm is in a natural position. There's no intention to handle the ball or to let it hit his arm. He does not move his arm in the direction of the ball or towards the ball. In any case, he was further trying to put it away. And the referee still punished that. Now, of course, in the end, Crystal Palace would have still lost the game. But at that point, the game was 2-0, thanks to goals from William Esteval and Joao Pedro. Those goals had given Chelsea the lead. So Enzo Fernandez steps up and he scores. And it's now, according to former Pitchmall lead or ex-Pitchmall chief, this is Keith Hackett. He says, while speaking to football, according to Football Insider, he says, and I quote, he says, Chelsea should not have received the penalty for that controversial incident. And I couldn't agree more with him. He has the same school of thought that I do have. And now, here's where the officiation becomes all wrong or bad, is that you have a correct decision made on one weekend in sort of a similar incident and a wrong decision made in the same weekend under more or less similar circumstances. Now, one referee is right, another is wrong. But because of the inconsistency between, you put the game in disrepute. You cause us to have this kind of debate on these forums about the officiation. Now, if the incident had happened in isolation, for example, let's say you're Darren England, and on Saturday, you're involved in the game between West Ham and Sunderland as VAR official, totally separate from the Man City game, which had the incident in question where you are VAR official, and you come and make that kind of decision in your game against between Chelsea and Crystal Palace, I would be one of those that would cut you some slack, because I'd say perhaps he did not watch that incident to pick it off of it. And he simply continued with what has been known to be the case in the Premier League. Now, let me give you another example. In the game between Arsenal and Manchester United, as Arsenal were being are played off the park, getting humiliated or embarrassed for the embarrassment of a performance that they decided to give, is that Harry Maguire handled the ball in the area. But the ball brushes off, I think, his boot or stud before hitting his arm in the area. So the referee decides it's not a penalty. And that's the correct decision to make. Now, I do not want to speculate or assume that the match referee in that game, I'm trying to find who the referee was. Referee for Arsenal, the Arsenal Man United game. I think it was no. What's his name? Craig Paulson. Yes, I think the referee was Craig Paulson. He did not give that as a penalty, and it was the correct decision to make. And yet, on the other side, so you have two referees in the same weekend under more or less similar circumstances decline to award a penalty, and then you have another awarding a penalty. Now, this is not the question of majority are right and minority are wrong, because whereas in a democracy, we go with the decision of the majority and ignore the minority, in this particular case, the minority were wrong. And that was Darren England. He was wrong to award that penalty. So Craig Paulson, in his game against Arsenal Man United, was right not to award a penalty for a handball by Harry Maguire, as was Farai Halam in the game between Wolverhampton Wanderers and Manchester City. So the question is, for how long are we going to entertain these kinds of bad decisions? Unfortunately, we have no control over what decisions are made, how they are made, and all that. We can only react to those decisions when they are made. The question is, do they make a deliberate attempt to self-correct? Now, therefore, you guys are asking, do you think Chelsea should have been awarded a penalty against Crystal Palace? And so far, 60% of you have said no. And that means, because I think 5 people have partaken part in that poll, and 2 have said yes, 3 have said no. You know, like I said in the preamble, that there will be people who are aligned with the justification of Darren England. But for me, what disqualifies his justification is that admission that the player handles the ball by mistake, that there is no intention for him to handle the ball. Whether it was destined for the back of the net or not, it's accidental. Now, if the argument is it was destined for the back of the net, then literally every ball that hits the arm of a player during a free kick, should we go on and assume it was destined for the back of the net, that player denied a clear and obvious goal scoring opportunity when they handled the ball or when it hit his arm, and so he prevented a goal? Therefore, we should issue a yellow card and a penalty if that player has been in box. Now, also, let's separate 2 things, because maybe I've used the words interchangeably that it may confuse some of you. There is a difference in the ball hitting the player's arm and the player handling the ball. In other words, in the first incident, when the ball hits the arm of the player, that means there's no intention or clear and obvious error from the player to handle the ball. In some cases, it may be subjective, depending on where their arms are, because Yes, you may not intend to handle the ball, but if a strike is going in and your arms are this, like as if you're playing a part together, then we may not give you so much leeway, especially if the ball does not come in contact with any part of your body prior to hitting the arm. So there's that. Then the player handling the ball. That's when a player makes a deliberate attempt to try and stop the movement of the ball or change the course of its direction using his arm, regardless of the arm, the part of the arm. You remember Arsenal's penalty claim in their game against Nottingham Forest, the incident by Ola Aina? I thought that was a penalty. I didn't watch the game, but I did review the incident. I thought that was a penalty. Why? Because he makes a deliberate attempt to move his hand towards the ball to prevent it from going outside, keep it in play. So that should have been a penalty. But then it wasn't. It was the wrong decision to make, in my humble opinion. Now, if you use that as precedent, not to award penalties, then a lot of deserved penalties are not going to be awarded. If you use the incident of Darren England for awarding penalties, then you're going to award so many penalties. Why? Because what you're telling us that even when the player is not at fault, they are faulted by the circumstances. You get my point? How many times have we seen an opponent player intentionally play the ball towards or onto an opponent's arm just to try and gain the advantage to win a penalty? We've seen that script so many times. It's as old as the modern game is. A lot of times, or plenty of times, Thierry Henry did that to try and carry the ball towards the arm of the opponent in order to win a penalty. Now, if you got tempted and flicked your fingers towards the ball, you'd consider penalty. But also, let's forget not that video assistant referee was not a part of that game. He wasn't there at the time. So if the referee gave it, it stood. There's no reviewing the incident. If the referee didn't give it, off it went. I've already said the VAR system is not wrong, is not bad. You know? Why? Because it's simply a system that shows you the evidence of what has happened, and then you as a human being, you pass judgment. Now, Pedri here comes to say, I think it was a penalty. And for him, he says, very clear penalty. Like I said, there will be people who will be aligned with Darren England. I'm just not one of those. Because you cannot acknowledge error of a player to say he did not intentionally handle the ball. The arm itself was closer to his body. In other words, a natural position. Two, the ball brushes off his chest before hitting the arm. You see all that and then still pass judgment that it's a clear penalty or that it's a penalty in any case. Because then what that implies, like I said, is that every time a ball will hit a player's arm, it should be a penalty. Two factors here for me. One, that the ball hits another part of the body of the player before it hits the arm. That's one. Two, that the referee acknowledges that there's no intention for the player to handle the ball. Now, like I said, under the guidance of the VAR official was that the ball was destined for the back of the net, and therefore he denied a goal scoring opportunity. That's why in Darren England's judgment, he decides to give a yellow card, in other words, which if it had been intentional would be a red card. If it had been intentional, we wouldn't even be discussing the moment. That's the point. So you acknowledge that there is error. there's no intention, that it is a mistake, and then you still penalize this mistake. Like I said, if Darren England had not been part of the Manchester City versus Wolves game, I'd cut him some slack, but he was part of that. And he was having the exchange with Farai Hallam when he refused to reverse his on-field decision. Let's say he learned nothing and forgot nothing from that particular incident. This is Amarachi says it was a clear penalty. Okay, that's his opinion. Pedri says it was in front of goal. He makes his body bigger. That's it. He does not make his body bigger. I mean, we cannot say you made your body bigger and then at the same time argue and make it bigger. That was not the case. Like I said, agree to disagree. Hence, it should be a penalty. It was the same thing, but outside a penalty area, it's okay, or even a penalty area, but not in front of goal. Now, again, for those of you that are saying not in front of goal, that is denying a goal scoring opportunity, you say he was the last man standing in front of goal, so it was a penalty. I think it's a penalty. That's your submission. And this is what I've said. So that means every time a team concedes a free kick and the ball is played onto or hits the arm of a player in that wall, if they are inside the 18, then it should be awarded as a penalty because they are the last line of defense, because they are preventing a goal scoring opportunity. Should that be then the school of argument that will go under down that path? Because yes, it's a goal scoring opportunity. You could argue the ball was destined for the back of the net. But then you also made the same observation that the player does not intend to handle the ball. That's the referee, Darren England. He says that in his justification or as part of his explanation to the stadium before issuing the yellow card and the penalty subsequently. And like I said, he was the fourth official in that game against Manchester City, against Wolves. So for me, it's not a penalty. And who better to sort of support our argument or school of thought than ex Pidgmore, head in Keith Hackett. Keith Hackett says it's not a penalty, and I do agree with him because of the justification he makes. You get the point. Go back to Harry Maguire. I've given that example. The ball somewhere on his stats before it hits his arm. As players try to appeal for a penalty, but the moment you look at that incident or you review the incident, you'll agree with Craig Paulson that it's not a penalty. The moment I saw Mosquera's handball in that game against Wolves and Manchester City, I mean, I've had to review the incident multiple times. And the moment it hits the lower part of his body, that's the lower part of the thigh, before hitting his arm, then it's not a penalty. In other words, in that backhead principle, it's about to hand. There's no clear intention for the player to handle the ball. It's a circumstance. So if your school of argument is going to be that every time, one, you're the last man, accident or not, ball to hand or not, I understand it's not a rule, but it's a principle at the back. That's why they say referees ought to, apply the rules with common sense. Then when you look at that arm, the way his father pulling it away, if he had intention to handle the ball, then he wouldn't be even laboring to take his hand further closer to his body. Like I say, it's a matter. Some others will not agree. And according to our 8 of you have so far voted. 50% say it should have been a penalty, and 50% say it was not a penalty. Mr. Tribe, it's okay. Sometimes we can be wrong. It is a penalty. I'm not saying we can never be wrong, That's the point. But I started off the submission by saying we all make mistakes. The question is, do we go back and review our actions and then self-correct? On a weekly basis, it doesn't feel that way for English officials because they seem to be making the same wrong mistakes week in, week out, that they do not learn from the incidents in which they are involved in. So this is not just about being right or wrong between you and I. It's about the whole officiation of the game and whether they self-correct. Because I've given you the example of the Man City game and the Arsenal game where you have two correct decisions for a possible penalty, which is not awarded, and it's the right decision. And then you have another in similar circumstances that is awarded. And like I said, when I was making that argument, it's not a question of democracy, of majority over minority. It's about principle. It's about observation and interpretation of the incidents. So while the incidents are independent of each other, there are similarities that draw upon in between them to say, here is a similarity of fact, here's a similarity of fact, but this is the conclusion by the different minds that were in charge of the game. You say, wait, are you talking about the Chelsea game because Enzo Fernandez penalty? Yes. I thought about another game. No, it's about the Chelsea game against Crystal Palace. That Enzo Fernandez penalty. That's the point of discussion because that's the game in which Darren England was involved in. He was the center referee. You say the Chelsea penalty is not a penalty. His hand was stuck to his body, generally stuck to his body, never a penalty. This is how we got eliminated from the UEFA Champions League 2023. This is not a penalty. So you see, you're making the same observation that I made, that Keith Hackett made, and a lot of other people made. So whereas these decisions can be subjective, the circumstances within which they happen are the ones that give us the interpretation to come to the conclusion of whether it's a penalty or not. There are cases where we've had penalties not awarded, and we say to ourselves, if it had been awarded, we would say, yeah, the referee had justification or was given justification to award the penalty. But if he did not award it, in other words, is also not at fault because he has a justification. It's a 50-50. And usually, those are not handball incidents. Those are incidents where there's a slight push, a slight nudge, or what appears to be a late tackle, or when a player does a bit of simulation and things like that in the area to try and gain advantage or to try and hoodwink the referee. You get it? Now, oftentimes, in those cases, is some level of contact, minimal or otherwise. It's all subject to interpretation. That's why I went back also to the example of Diego Dalot's incident against Jeremy Doku in the Manchester Derby. He's given a yellow card for what appears to be a dangerous tackle, which is a high boot on the knee of Jeremy Doku. Now, when you watch the incident in replay, it appears worse than it was actually in actual time. When you see it in a flash, it doesn't look bad. It looks like most a mistimed tackle. And I know oftentimes players have been penalized for such incidents with red cards. And I did say to myself, if the referee had been summoned to the monitor to review that particular incident, if he had returned to the pitch and awarded a red card, I do not think many people would have faulted him for it. Because in the replay, it will always appear more ugly than it actually is. And Diego Dalot would have been faulted for the fact of playing, that kind of tackle. It's a high boot, So, but he gets away with it. And the VAR officials seem to agree, okay, it's not a clear and obvious error by the referee. He's seen the incident, he's handed a yellow card. And they reviewed it, whatever the interpretation was, they decided not to summon him to the monitor. So it becomes that. I'm not a big fan of Eddie Howe. That's Eddie Howe out, no plan B. B, C, D when plan A doesn't work. That's Dennis Jukes. Now, for those of you that do not remember, Dennis Jukes is a Newcastle fan, and time and again, I remember the last time we had an engagement with him. We were speaking about again Ed Howe. He was saying he thinks that Ed Howe has taken them thus far in the Newcastle project that they ought to part ways with him and look on to another manager that then can elevate them from the stage where he's put them at onto the next level. While I did not feel at the time, and still not feel that may be the decision that is made by the club, because at that time he went and sampled out that maybe a manager like Jose Mourinho would be better suited to take them from the level that they are at to the next level. And what level is that? Ed Howe has put them back in the UEFA Champions League. I think this is their second time in the UEFA Champions League in 3 seasons. Then he's won them at their first, major silverware in 71 years when he guided them to the triumph of the EFL Cup. That was last season when they beat Liverpool 2-1 in the finals. And this season, he's still taken them thus far to the semi-finals of the competition, where they lost the first leg by 2-0 against Manchester City at the St. James's Park, and they still have it all to do when they travel to the stadium, which is a more difficult ask for them to go and win there by 3-0 to advance to the finals. That's in the first week of February, midweek. That game should be coming, I think, on a Wednesday. Should be the 4th or 3rd of February, thereabouts. So he thinks that Ed Howe lacks plan B, C, D to take them over the line. And now, here's the thing. When you talk about plan A, B, C, D, perhaps a good number of fans may agree in resonance to what happens with their managers when they do feel frustrated, when they fail to change certain things in particular games, not in the entirety of their management of the team, but in certain games where they feel they should be winning. Now, with that said, there's some truth to what you say. For me, I won't put it to a lack of plan B and C. Sometimes, one, you have a bad day. Sometimes, no matter what you do, things just won't work out for you. Sometimes, players just fall off in terms of their intensity, in terms of their energy, in terms of what they give overall on the pitch. And while Newcastle tried yesterday in that loss to Aston Villa, I did feel they lacked that cutting edge. He started Yohan Wissa ahead of Nick Voltmada. I do not fault him for that. Bringing on Anthony Elanga. So now the likes of, what's his name? That's our midfielder that you guys got from Aston Villa. His name constantly eludes me. What's his name? Jacob Ramsey. Yes, I think Jacob Ramsey. So he put all that player power in changes, and it still had no effect. I think when they look back in retrospect, they must feel that Anthony Elanga is yet to live to his bidding. Now, it's not to say that he would not rise to the occasion, but usually when you sign a player from the Premier League to another Premier League club, your hope is that he does not need a long time to adapt. And yet, depending on the player, sometimes that happens. The least thing you expect is to sign a player from one Premier League club to another where he's been brilliant and then he goes on to flop. When you ask Tottenham fans about their impressions on what's the youngster's name? Johnson, the kid that just transferred from Spurs to Crystal Palace, you may have a mixed reaction. Some will say he was a success, others will say it was average, others will say he was not a success. Of course, he will forever be remembered for that moment of scoring that goal in the UEFA Europa League final. That cannot be changed. And maybe that's what will compel many to say he was a success. When you look at, when you go back to 2011 when Chelsea signed Fernando Torres from Liverpool, Some Chelsea fans will argue he was a success because he helped them win that 2012 UEFA Champions League title. Remember his goal against Barcelona in the semi-finals. Now, I, for one, feel he was not a success because he did not bang in all the goals that he was banging in at Liverpool that he was bought for. When he arrived to Chelsea, that was never the case. When you remember Darren Benty making the move, I think, from Charlton to join Tottenham Hotspurs, was he a success? Absolutely not. He then went to Sunderland, where he was an absolute success. And he then transferred to Aston Villa, where he was fairly a success. So you have those kinds of incidents or those kinds of things. So Anthony Elanga is in that mold. When it comes to Ed Howe is a good manager that is yet to prove himself at the top level. Ed Howe is no outside the bracket of what Mikel Arteta is, in my opinion. Why? Because until you win major silverware, you remain an average manager. You remain one of the good ones, just not one of the best. When people talk about elite managers, and Arsenal fans keep adding Mikel Arteta to that list, I say he is a brilliant manager. He's just not there yet. He's just not yet crossed that line. How do you cross that line? By winning major silverware. When you look at Xabi Alonso, the reason as why he's held in high regard is because of the silverware he won, that cup double in 2023-2024 with Bayer Leverkusen, in addition to guiding them to the finals of the UEFA Europa League, regardless to the fact that they lost to Atlanta by 3-0. They had to from Ademola Lookman. So you remember Mauricio Pochettino? He almost appeared like an elite manager. Given how competitive he made Tottenham Hotspurs, at one point they finished second in the Premier League, guided them to the finals of the UEFA Champions League title, but they never won a piece of silverware with him, not even in a domestic cup competition. It's after he got the role at PSG, that he ever got silverware to his name as manager. And that's why, even when I appreciate him for being an excellent manager, in terms of building for you a competitive team, I still have questions over his winning. Jurgen Klopp was a brilliant manager. He won 2 Bundesliga titles in an almost impossible league in the German Bundesliga to overthrow the dominance of Bayern Munich. He did it. And that put him out there among the very best of managers. When he came to Liverpool, until he won the Premier League title, until he won that UEFA Champions League title, there are still question marks over him. A lot of people seem to have the school of thought that he has a certain form of bad luck that follows him, to say, because he loses many finals. You remember 2013, he lost that UEFA Champions League final against Bayern Munich by 2-1. Then he lost 2 UEFA Champions League finals while at Liverpool in 2018 and in 2022, I think. Then he had lost a UEFA Europa League final against Sevilla in 2016, when Sevilla were winning those 3 consecutive UEFA Europa League titles under Unai Emery. Then he lost a cup final there's a cup final he lost. So he seemed to be in that sort of realm, but he won some silverware that puts him in the bracket of elite managers. So Ed Howe is a good manager or a good head coach, but he's yet to cross that line. He's yet to cross that line. If he guides Newcastle to a 2nd place finish, to a 3rd place finish, and to an FA Cup, we'll start to think of him in an even better mold than we actually see him. He will have not yet crossed the line, but his ratings will improve. So when you say Ed Howe perhaps is out of his depth, I could agree to say he's brought this Newcastle project thus far that it may require somebody with a different mold or a different mentality to take them over the line. While you're having those thoughts and conversations as Newcastle fans in your respective forums, some Arsenal fans are having similar conversations within their respective forums. Many, and I do not mean majority, but a good number of them, remain with the school of thought that should Mikel Arteta fail to guide them to any piece of major silverware, and by major I mean Premier League title or UEFA Champions League title, then he should kiss the job goodbye. That Arsenal should let go of him and look to get a manager that can get them over the line. And this is a topic that we've discussed before in this current season. When somebody asked me the question, if Arsenal were to get rid of Mikel Arteta, who to take over the realms at Arsenal? And I remember saying Pep Guardiola was important to get because he's the best there is. Two, I said was the man. Three, I said Jurgen Klopp was equally impossible to get because he said he would never manage another club in England or in English football other than Liverpool. So Luis Enrique was on top of that list. Julian Nagelsmann, not because he's the most elite of managers, but he's won silverware before with Bayern Munich. Now, a lot of people seem to think that it's easy to win when you have an elite team. I remember fans who questioned the credentials of Pep Guardiola at Barcelona when he won all those major trophies. They seem to think, yeah, he has the best team in the world, so he should win anyway. He's expected to win anyway. It's not that simple. When he came to Manchester City, yes, we floated around the money sort of narrative to say, yeah, Manchester City have literally bought themselves titles, buying the elite, the best players that there are to build a squad that went on to dominate English football. The question I always put forward is that, do you think if the same squad had been given to a different manager, he would win with it? There's no straight answer to that, but to say it's not a given that once you're given all the proper tools, then your destiny is to win. Oftentimes they counter the argument with, can Pep Guardiola be given a team like maybe Rotherham or Wrexham and he guides them to silverware in the championship? It's not that simple because everything has context to it. You need good players to win championships. That's why even when you have outliers of teams that go out and win silverware, the likes of Leicester City in 2016, have good players within those realms. That's why after winning that premiership, Man City came for Riyad Mahrez, Chelsea took N'Golo Kante and Danny Drinking Water. In other words, you remember Arsenal wanted Jamie Vardy. He only chose to stay. So that happens. That even when you have an outlier, there's a recognition that there are exceptional players within those ranks. When you look at the overall squad of Newcastle, I do not think it lacks in quality. I do not think it lacks quality in depth for the team that they are. Because as big as a brand Newcastle is in English football, and perhaps to an extent in global football, they are still not within the same brackets of Liverpool, Manchester City, and Arsenal. By extension, Chelsea and Man United, in terms of resources. We know the kinds of sacrifices that they've had to make to build what they are trying to build. When you go back 2 years ago, they had to let go of to let go of Elliot Anderson and Yakuba Minte just to stay on the right side of the profit and sustainability rules of the Premier League. For those of you that care to remember, I think still it was in the course of this season, we did a video on the channel that the system was rigged against teams like Newcastle. Why? Because really they have rich investors. They are not allowed to just go and pick a chunk of money from their coffers as rich people or rich owners and throw it to Newcastle to take them from the current step they are in to the next step, the way Manchester City were able to do when you go back to 2008, going on to 2010, and building that squad that eventually won the league title in 2012. That's not the case. So this summer they were forced to sell Alexander Isak. Now the circumstance is different. They were not compelled by profit and sustainability rules, but how many times do you think Newcastle will be forced to sell their elite players just because those players may be feeling that it's taking them longer to move from the current stage that they are at in their project or building block to the next one? I've said this time and again, and I repeat it. If Arsenal do not win major silverware this season, some of those key players in that squad will want to leave the club. Why? Because they will feel they have offered what they think is their absolute best, and it's not been good enough to win them the title. So some of them may be thinking, if I move to Real Madrid, if I go to Barcelona, if I go to Man City or any other club, or a Bayern Munich or a PSG, I may have a bigger opportunity or a bigger chance to win silverware than I am if I stay at Arsenal. Of course, it's all dependent on circumstances. So, until those lines are crossed, all these managers cannot be painted in more glory than they are actually in. I'm trying to see what the headline of that was, that video that we did, so that I can make refer you guys to it. So that I can refer you guys to it and you go and watch it. So, Jesus Christ, I just can't seem to find it. Yes, we did it on, the video was uploaded on July 29th, 2025. Is the Premier League system rigged against Newcastle and other mid-table teams? That was the question. And I can leave, I'll leave perhaps a link in the description to that particular video, so that you guys can go and perhaps draw some bit of reference to it, and particularly to you, Dennis Dukes, But yeah, in terms of being an elite manager, I do think that I do feel that Ed Howe could be well out of his depth, that he could be another Mauricio Pochettino. The one thing is better than Mauricio Pochettino is that with Newcastle, he's won them at least a cup, which Mauricio Pochettino never got to do with Tottenham Hotspurs. So that's how I look at it. But the question always is that if not him, then who? If you part ways with him, who do you look to deploy? Do you go for an Enzo Maresca? He's proven he can win. He's capable of building you a good team. Do you go to Jose Mourinho? Jose Mourinho is all about the right set of tools to guide you to silverware. It may take a bit of time, but he will do it anyway. He will not build you a team that goes on to be competitive for the next 5, 6, 7 years. No, but you rest assured he will win you a piece of silverware. He never did it for Tottenham Hotspurs because they foolishly decided to sack him, I think about 10 or 11 days before a cup final that they had against Manchester City, and they ended up losing that one by 1-0. That goal, I think, was scored by Ilkay Gundogan. Now, so that's the question. Do you go for Julian Nagelsmann? Do you try and entice a Carlo Ancelotti? Who do you bring in to take you to the next level? And how do you navigate the rules to gain that competitive advantage in terms of further squad building? Because when you have players like Malik Thiaw, Steven Botman, Dan Burn, Kieran Trippier, Tino Livramento, that is being, loved by clubs like Arsenal, Manchester City, those are some elite defenders that you have on your hands. When you look at that that Newcastle midfield of Bruno Guimaraes, Sandro Tonali, of course, yesterday they missed him. He was in the stands just watching. Sandro Tonali, Jolinton, that's a good team. Their substitutions may not be up to beat as they are. The likes of Joe Willock, he's a bit of an average player for me. You'll have that. Then up front, Anthony Langa, Anthony Gordon, Johan Wissa, Nick Voltmada, William Osula, all those, Jacob Murphy, good players. But maybe indeed, maybe Ed Howe needs a better plan B and C, and perhaps D to get him over the line. So we'll see where that leads. Then quickly, the reaction. We had the reaction for the Man United game, but given the size of the game that it was, there's no harm in sort of, looking at it. Like I said, I had no kind words for those Arsenal players. They looked shambolic, they looked average, they looked lost, they looked out of their depth, they looked like they were crumbling under pressure, they looked like they were devoid of ideas, they looked like they didn't know what to do in that game. They felt like the Arsenal team that we watched in 2022-2023 that crumbled against teams like West Ham in that 2-2 draw after taking a 2-0 lead, a team that crumbled against Southampton in a 3-3 draw, a team that lost to Nottingham Forest, a team that lost by 3-0 to Brighton and Hove Albion. That's what they felt against Manchester United. Once they score that goal, they suddenly drop off. And it's not the first time it's happened with Arsenal that once they score a goal, I don't know whether they feel or they get the feeling that it's a job done. I do not know where that comes from. Because ordinarily, once you score a goal, you should be desperately looking for another. Not desperate enough to leave yourself exposed to a counterattack or something, but you must be intentional. Because even 2 goals are not enough. Because the moment that scoreline is hard, then you almost feel that it's closer to getting back to square one than it is for you to see it through. They had a very good 30 minutes. And time and again, they've been the orchestrators of their own downfall. Martin Zubimendi was culprit in this particular case for conceding possession in the wrong area, and they got punished through Brian Mbeumo. It's a similar incident that happened against Tottenham Hotspur when they conceded that goal by Richarlison. Again, held on to the ball too long. They nicked it off of him by Joao Paulinho, and then Tottenham score in a game in which they had a sniff on goal. Yesterday, there's so many, and I've said this before. Yes, it could be the way they play. It could be the way they build up. But sometimes I can't help but feel there are too many passes backwards, sideways, and oftentimes I want to see that team play forward, because you're not going to score in the back of your own net to win a game. You're going to score on the opposite side. So you keep playing it backwards. It's not helpful. So, and how many times have they been caught out with just trying to do that, even when there are options to play in front? So yesterday it was Martin Zubimendi. Against FC Bournemouth, it was Gabriel Magalhaes playing that ball into Evan Nilsson. So there's that. Then they did not do the basics right. They did not fight for the 50-50s. They did not close down opponents. They committed spaces away in front of goal. And that's why Man United were able to score 2 brilliant goals through Patrick Togu and Matthias Cunha to win the game by 3-2. So you have all those things that went wrong. You have Mikel Arteta, who is to blame for so much. Why? Because he deflated the game when he made those substitutions to withdraw Martin Odegaard and Martin Zubimendi at the same time. I had no qualms whatsoever on the other choices of substitutions. Nonetheless, I thought in that very moment, he should have taken off Leandro Trossard for a winger. Now, in withdrawing Martin Odegaard and Martin Zubimendi, who had not covered themselves in glory weren't having the best of days. He lost control in that midfield. He lost a player that could dictate the tempo of the game because Mikel Merino doesn't offer you that. Declan Rice doesn't offer you that. And suddenly, not Ebelechi Eze. So, again, that's on him. That's on Mikel Arteta because he should have done better. So Man United cover themselves in glory because they did well. They were effective in their key moments. They defended well. They denied Arsenal spaces. And again, Arsenal, were culprits for not taking risk. I do not know why they do not want to take risk. How? Trying to shoot from distance. Always they want to pass the ball to the last line, to the last man, to find the back of the net. That's why Bukayo Saka gets the ball in the area and tries to find a Noni Madueke. Noni Madueke gets the ball in the area, and instead of going for a shot, he tries to find a Ben White, instead plays the ball out. You get that? So something has to change about that team. Their mentality is not of a winning team. And until they cross that line, we cannot argue against that mentality. How many winners do you have in that team? Besides Gabriel Jesus? I don't see anybody else in terms of having won major silverware. Maybe Martins Zubimendi won the Euros, Mikel Merino, So that's it. Anyways, guys, it's been a wonderful discussion to have with you. Thank you so much, Pedri. Thank you so much, Amarachi. Thank you so much, Joanne, and every single one of you that chipped in for this morning broadcast. For those of you that participated in our poll this morning, thank you so much for your participation. It ended up with a 50-50. After 10 votes are made, 50% of you said it was a penalty. That 50% of you said it wasn't a penalty. It's the subjective nature of those decisions. But yeah, allow me to wrap it up here and wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Stay blessed, have a blessed week, and let's catch up later tonight. Do not forget, there's a Premier League game between Everton and Leeds United. We'll do our best to keep tabs on that. There's a game in the Spanish La Liga, so do not miss out on that as well. And yeah, we'll go through the week that way until Wednesday when UEFA Champions League does return, because there are some blockbuster games. Top 8 is on the line for many of those teams. Are on the line for many of those teams. So there's a lot and plenty to play for come Wednesday. So we'll also be looking forward to that. Otherwise, allow me to wrap it up here and wish you a wonderful rest of the day and a blessed week entirely. Bye-bye for now. Stay blessed.